Hey guys, and welcome back to Scarlet Sprites. With the introduction of the RetroTINK 2X, I've seen a lot of questions asking about the quality of video that one can expect when using it with the N64. With that in mind, I decided to do a few captures and present them alongside what I would consider the Rolls-Royce of N64 video quality, the UltraHDMI. To get a few of you up to speed who may not be aware of the two options in this video, the RetroTINK 2X is a low latency HDMI solution for your retro consoles. It will accept composite, S-video, or component connections and output a 480p HDMI signal with virtually no lag. You can think of it as a much more lightweight OSS-C or FrameMeister. Our other HDMI solution for today's video is the UltraHDMI, which is a full-on mod for your N64. It features a number of configurable options in its menu and it is capable of outputting a 720p or 1080p signal. And that's a good segue into my next disclaimer. There are so many potential configurations with the UltraHDMI that I could probably spend hours evaluating all the possible options, and we don't have that kind of time today. So we're going to keep this relatively simple. All video captures from the UltraHDMI are done with the out-of-the-box factory settings. Arguably, the biggest thing to note with that is the 720p will be the default resolution. I could easily change that to 1080p, but then we go right down the rabbit hole I just mentioned. So no, we are going to trust that Marshall at Retroactive knows what he's doing and is giving us a decent default that is more than adequate for the majority of situations. Alright, coming out of the gate with the UltraHDMI, it's apparent that this is very colorful. The clock counter at the top is very sharp, the pixels look good, and then fading over to the RetroTINK, just a slight drop in quality. You can see things are just a little bit more murky than they are on the UltraHDMI, and that's more prevalent here for sure in this side-by-side comparison. Overall, it's not bad, but there's definitely a difference between the two devices. We'll see the same thing on the title screen where the UltraHDMI's colors and overall sharpness is just a little bit higher than the lower resolution the S-video can produce via the RetroTINK 2X. Next up is an N64 staple, Goldeneye. This is a game that, in my opinion, hasn't aged well graphically. GameTech.us, a distributor for the UltraHDMI, even states on the product page that you shouldn't expect the UltraHDMI to add more detail or resolution than the N64 is capable of. It isn't going to solve blurry textures or add any additional details, and this is probably a prime example of that statement in practice. In other words, it is what it is, and it isn't always pretty. My takeaway from the side-by-side in this comparison is that there is some very minor detail lost on the RetroTINK 2X output. Particularly in the back of the room, you'll notice the red pipe is more prominent on the UltraHDMI, whereas it's kind of lost on the RetroTINK. Switching over now to Hydra Thunder, and this might be my most favorite game to look at on the UltraHDMI. It looks absolutely gorgeous coming out 720p. Switching to the RetroTINK, not quite the same level of quality. It suffers a little bit from that murkiness that we saw with F-Zero, but overall not too terrible. The side-by-side comparison, I think it's easy to tell that the UltraHDMI version really benefits from that 720p resolution bump. The RetroTINK still looks pretty good, but you can tell it's a lower quality signal being fed. Next up we have Mischief Makers, and I chose this one not only because it's a great game, but also because it's one of the few examples of 2D platforming that we have on the N64. We've already seen a pattern that the UltraHDMI has better overall colors and a sharper picture. It should, it's a pure digital signal. Considering that, and that the RetroTINK is working with an inferior signal to start with, I think it does a pretty damn good job of holding things down in this one. There's no obvious loss of details. The background, clouds, trees, and shadows look pretty good. If the UltraHDMI was a perfect 10, I think I'd give the RetroTINK a solid 8 on this one. Here's one I'm sure people wanted to see, Mario Kart. And again, I think the RetroTINK does a pretty good job considering its limitations. Especially looking at the two title screens, they're very similar. Watching the demo run, a lot of the same things that we've already seen in past clips. Pay attention to the signage in the background. I think that's where you're going to see most differences in this one, but otherwise very similar to the results we've seen before with other games. And at this point, I'm just tossing this one in as a bonus clip. You guys kind of get the idea, know the strengths and weaknesses at this point. The only thing that's a little interesting in this one is how much darker the grass is in the demo on the RetroTINK than it is on the UltraHDMI feed. Looking at our examples, I think it's clear that the UltraHDMI is the winner, which isn't really a huge revelation. But what might be surprising to you is just how comparable the RetroTINK 2X gets. Consider that the UltraHDMI costs $150 and then needs to be installed into your console, something you may or may not be able to do. If you can't do this yourself, that's at least another $40 to $50 with the install, and that's not factoring in shipping to and from your installer. So yes, the UltraHDMI is awesome and it is feature rich, but it's also going to cost almost double what the RetroTINK 2X does, and it is solely for your N64. Is that bump in quality and ability to customize your picture worth it? Maybe. I personally really love having it, and I think it's great to be able to plug directly into a modern TV without the need for an external scaler. But it's certainly not the budget option. On the other hand, the RetroTINK 2X does a more than adequate job line doubling and outing a signal with almost no lag. It's $100 and it can be used with any of your retro consoles provided they at least have a composite connection. Is it equally as pretty? No. You guys can tell from the samples that it falls a little short of its competitor in this video, but not by a margin that I would consider drastic, and in fact, in almost all cases, it actually looks really good. At the end of the day, it's up to you to decide what's right for you. If the N64 is hands down your favorite system, you might opt for the UltraHDMI, and who could blame you? If you're a more casual player and aren't interested in modding a bunch of systems, the RetroTINK 2X will more than suffice. Ultimately, I hope that you found the screen captures useful, since there seemed to be a lot of chatter about how the RetroTINK 2X handled the N64, and I just wanted to provide that for those of you who are interested. As always, thanks for stopping by and taking the time to watch. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you all next time. Later, guys.